sepia and the burnt umber most often. But I also have a bottle of red earth, and I combine it. It's very red, so I combine it with the burnt umber to quiet it down a little bit. And that's something that you can, if you want to try it, you can take some from my bottle here. When you get started, I'll take a brush to wet my paper. And I'm wetting the paper so that the watercolor that I'm going to put on here stays wet longer. You got to keep the watercolor wash wet before you put the ink and granulation medium on it, because it'll stop where it starts to dry. It'll only travel where it's wet. So.
Are you wetting the back as well as the front?
No, just the front.
Okay.
Just putting some raw sienna white, and immediately I'm going to put some ink on that wash. This is the burnt umber. A couple drops. Right away, I'm going to put the granulation medium, squirt it into that, and it'll travel down the wet wash. And it'll create these channels of pigment and clearing. Everybody see that? So you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know if it's going to go dark or solid or very, very thin or too pale. It may end up on the floor. Where you best close when you're doing this. So you'll notice when you play with this, you're getting used to it, that the first drop that you put down is very intense in terms of pigment. And it's going to be a little bit darker. So you may want to keep adding a little bit of the granulation medium to disperse that very, very dark pigmented spot. The other option is to take a piece of scrap paper. I'll do this on a second piece, second sample here. This one I'll put some blue and some red. Put the scrap paper up here. I'll put the drop on the scrap paper so that the darkest part stays on the scrap paper. The rest of it will roll down. So it'll be wet. That's my ink. Whoops. Now it's traveling down the watercolor.
So do you put the granulation medium only on the scrap paper and let it roll, or do you also put it on the paper?
Yes, I wet the paper, the scrap paper, then I put my ink on it, and then immediately I put the granulation medium on it, just as if I were doing it directly on the painting.
Wait, I still don't understand. It's just on the scrap paper with the ink.
I dropped the ink on the scrap paper that was wet. It can either have paint on it, but it just needs water, really. And then I drop the ink. I'll do it again. quinacridone gold. Drop on the scrap paper. Granulation medium immediately.
I see.
So the very dark staining part stays on the scrap paper. It's still going to be fairly dark or intense depending on how much you put on the painting, but there's one option to reduce that intense staining at the top, at the beginning of where you're applying it. So you could spend a lot of time just figuring out how this works. You know, how much color, how much paint, how much ink, how much granulation medium, and see what happens. Now it's going to dry lighter. Watercolor dries lighter, but because you're dispersing the watercolor color with ink and granulation medium, you're really thinning out the base color, the base wash of the watercolor. So you may need to touch it up after it's dried. So I'll dry this and I'll show you what I mean.
Oh, yum.
Creating some more channels there. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser works wonders if you get it on your table or someplace you don't want it to be, except for clothing. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser works great for that. Try this. I'm going to wait a sec. Just blowing around. I'll let that dry for a second. I want to show you some different colors. I don't use a lot of different ink colors. I use sepia, the burnt umber, the red earth mixed with a little bit of burnt umber. As I said, I sometimes use indigo. This is the colors just on water. No paint here. Pass these around. These are some other colors.
So, for example, in that middle one, which has really cool color, you could control where those colors went the same way as when painting by controlling where you put down the initial water on your initial paper.
You have some control, but once it starts hitting the wet, you don't know what direction it's going to go in. So I put the paint down fairly thick so that it would maintain some of the color. But you can already see it starting to wash out a little bit. These are just examples of different applications for this technique.
So are these paint swatches that you just put the granulation medium on?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Are these just a
Yes.
paint swatch?
No, there's no
Acrylic
paint.
ink.
It's just water. It's ink.
It's ink.
It's just
all
ink.
ink.
There's only ink. There's no watercolor on those. That's
Okay.
pure ink
Wow.
on water, which you can use in painting if you want to. But
There's more colors here than the 3 or 4 you mentioned.
oh yeah, Dalarani has 15 different ink colors. Some of them are just too intense, or they don't move really well. The white is very, very opaque everywhere. It seems it doesn't really granulate as well as the ones that I've recommended for you guys to get.
Seems like we're introducing a whole new layer of uncontrol to this whole.
Yeah, you give up a lot of control with this.
Okay.
I mean, you do with watercolor anyway, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't stay in place.
Now, Paul, some of these that you're showing us, like the pots, there's very specific areas where granulation has taken place
Yeah.
within that pot. Whereas this, you can see how it would run down.
Yeah. I'm going to demonstrate a pot and show how to keep it in a space.
We can control it.
All right, now you can see that this is faded some. It's not as dark as it was. The color is a little more washed out. So you can take a thin wash of transparent color. And this will liven it up. You'll still see the granulation effect. You'll still see the texture from the medium underneath if you're using good transparent color and a thin wash.
Excuse me, that does not lift because it's acrylic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you really scrub it so that it will come off, if you take a Mr. Clean Magic eraser to it, it will all come off. And but the watercolor will move in underneath it will move faster than the acrylic ink will.
Okay, great, that's neat.
Paul, does the using a hair dryer change the texture in any way? Or no.
I don't advise using a hair dryer until it's fairly set, because it can just blow other channels and blow it up onto the floor with it. So
When you say transparent, you're just using water? Or you actually have
well, there are grades of watercolor: semi-transparent, transparent, opaque, and semi-opaque. So I use only transparent or semi-transparent watercolors in my practice and in my teaching. Not gouache. Definitely not gouache. That's totally opaque. But the more opaque the product that you're going to use, the more it's going to cover over the texture of the granulation medium. Everybody see the difference when I put a thin wash of reds and yellows over it?
Oh, yeah.
So
That would be nice
that
for
was the
tree.
one that you added.
I'm sorry?
This is the one you added.
This is the one, just this one. I just added a layer, I dried it and I added a layer of gold here and some orange up here. If you work it too much with a layer on top, it's going to look overworked. So that's the basic technique. Now I'll demonstrate a couple of miniature paintings, a landscape and a pot. Also, I have videos of these demonstrations that I did for the online workshop during the pandemic. If anybody wants me to send them the set of their three videos, 3 or 4 short videos, 10-minute videos. Just put your name down, your email address, and I'll be happy to send you what I have. I was going to run through a couple of them today, but I think I'll just do the live demos and see where that gets us.
You had indicated that we should have not great brushes to use this material. Is there any particular way that you clean your brushes?
Just water.
Okay, even with the acrylic ink?
Yeah, just water.
Okay.
I use inexpensive synthetic brushes, and well, I have even long before I used the acrylic ink. You know, my expensive sable brushes seem to wear down quickly, and you know, so. And I haven't found much difference. Some artists really do prefer, but
Do you use different brushes for the, do you reserve some for watercolor, reserve some for acrylic, or are you interchangeable?
I
You
don't.
care?
I don't. When I started reading about it online, I thought, oh, this is scary. I should be really careful. You should use really cheap brushes. And I found that it really doesn't make a difference at all. You know, it really does wash off. I mean, if you let it sit until the brush dries, I don't know what's going to happen. I wouldn't think it'd be pretty, but it's not going to be as bad as resist, you know, the masking fluid. But just sticking it in the water should be fine. I'm going to make a moon landscape, very, very simple. My horizon, sky, land. Very, very complex, very sophisticated.
Very comfortable.
And I don't like to touch the sticky part of these stickers, so I use a blade just to lift it off, stick it on my paper, press it down good so that it doesn't bleed. When you're using stickers, I don't know if you've done that before, if your wash is very, very thin, there's more of a likelihood that it might seep under your sticker or masking tape or whatever you're using. And if the wash is fairly thick, then you don't have to worry about that, generally, if you have a decent quality product that sticks. Okay, so here's my moon, land, sky. I'm just going to put a very quick wash onto the sky. Start the other painting while I let that dry a little bit. I'm going to let the sky down to the horizon, just water. Don't want too much water on there because, again, I don't want the wash to be too thin and seeping into my moon. Although there is a fix for that. You can remove, if you've got a circle cutout, you can remove the paint and the acrylic ink when it's dry. Just taking some Payne's Gray, painting my sky. A little bit lighter down toward the horizon. Just not adding more paint to my brush. put a couple dark streaks. I'm going to set that aside. Very simple.
Silly question. Do you ever experience your paper when it's wet buckling
Yeah.
along with the texture of the board you're using?
It depends more on the type of paper and how much water I'm putting on it.
Okay.
If I put a lot of, I put a lot of water, if I want to keep my washes really wet for a really long time, I'll soak my paper back in both sides in the tub or sink or under the faucet, but let it really absorb the water. I'll lay it flat on my plastic board, which won't dry as quickly as masonite board. And then if it starts to buckle, I should say when it starts to buckle, I'll just lift it and put it back down and let it stay flat. And then I can work on, if I'm doing a sky that's sort of very, very moody, I want to keep it wet so that I don't have hard edges.
I did a painting and I got these little lines over my sky and I
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah, I've
It
got a
was-
lot of those.
It was from the waffles of the board.
Right, yeah, the paint will go into the grooves.
I tried plexiglass.
I now use Gator board.
Do you ever use brush paper?
Yeah.
Or does that kind of,
No, you can't. I mean, rough paper would amplify the textural effect of the granulation of the ink. I have used it. I generally use cold press 140 arches. That's my go-to. But I like the cold press, the rough.
I'm curious about the arches cold press. Are the front and the back the same, or are there a difference in quality? 'Cause I don't-
One side is a little bit smoother, one side is just a little bit more textured, but I paint on both sides. Whenever I have a painting that I'm not going to give away or sell, I just use the back of it. You know. Got a lot of those. Okay. Folder. So when I'm doing something where I want some symmetry, pots, and I'll take a piece of paper, I'll cut it out, open it up, so it's symmetrical, and I'll use that as a template. I could do it freehand, and it takes me forever, and it's never quite right. So it's a trick that I use. Did I do that in class, Idris?
Yeah, and bottles.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. The wine bottles.
First of all, you've emptied it in order to paint it, and then
Yeah, that was the fun part.
I'm sorry, what?
And I am teaching intermediate watercolor classes at the New Art Center. They start next week. 2 online classes, 1 in-person class. And I don't teach acrylic ink in those classes, although students who've taken my workshops and are in my conventional watercolor classes do sometimes use the ink to add to their compositions. Okay, so I've got a basic pot here, okay? So, Nancy's question was about how do you contain the paint, the acrylic ink, the medium, within the boundaries that you're trying to paint. So, everything, I'm going to wet the whole pot, because I only, right now, I'm not going to do a background, I only want to do the pot. And I'm going to have a light source coming from one direction or the other, so I'll have it come from the from the left. The left side of the pot will be lighter, shadow side will be on the right side.
And you're not gonna tape that down?
Just the top, just
Because
so
you're
that I
just
can
doing
hold
the
it
top,
up.
yeah.
Normally I do, but I think there were some pots going around. This is the technique. So. Just wetting the pot. That's fairly soupy. With some of that water. So I'm going to start on the shadow side, putting my darkest colors, my heaviest paint on that side, and add my granulation medium into that wash right away. And I'll make it multicolored, so I'll add some ultramarine.
It might help if we stood and watched.
Feel free. I'll hold it up, but you can see better if you're closer.
Did you add alizarin? Or-
And I added alizarin to the top,
Cobalt blue. Yeah.
ultramarine, I think, ultramarine, and liquid gold. Right away, I'll drop in some some ink. This is burnt umber. Immediately go with the granulation medium and move my page and let it do what it's going to do.
That's a lot of pigment there.
Yep.
That's
Well, it's going to get lighter.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's going to blend in. The more you do this,
Yeah.
the more all the colors tend to merge, and you end up sometimes with a nice gray or not so nice gray. Oh, see that?
Nice.
This is the granulation medium. Yep. This is clear. And I can run a video that demonstrates the pot painting if you want to see it really big. Now this is, you see it's pooling here, it's going to run down, so you usually have to take a towel on board to catch the runaways. And then it'll run away. But have no fear, since the Clean Magic Eraser is here. That'll take care of that. All right, so I want to move some of this color over to the top edge over here that I didn't catch. So I can just move a little bit of that paint. I'm trying to keep this side of the pot light, so I don't want that really dark ink puddle to spend too much time over there darkening that. So there's a lot to track, when you're doing this. The more you practice. I've got specks from my paper towel on outside of the pot, not a problem. Take care of that later. I can lift some of the dark that may be too dark that I don't want with a brush. If I don't mind about having texture, I can blot it with a paper towel, a tissue. That.
And on this, you didn't use your red earth.
I didn't use,
Oh,
I just
yeah.
used the
Yeah,
bright
yeah.
sienna on
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you're doing a painting, you might think, I like a little bit of texture over here. So you could put a drop down and hope for the best. But you can also put a drop on your board. Take your brush. If it's still wet, if the base is still wet, add a little bit of ink right there, wherever you want. And then granulation medium. And let it merge with. So that's the basic. Now, I let this dry, and then I might touch up. When it's good dry, I might touch up the shadow side a little bit more, or if it gets too faded on the light side, I might touch that up with a pale wash of, whatever color's down there. And that's what I did in this plot here. And one of the videos is of this, that's in that group of videos, where the base wash was darkened after the ink and the granulation medium were applied and it thoroughly dried. Then I tinted these gold and brown colors and the blue on top of here because they were more washed out. But they were thin layers, so you can still see the light effects coming through from the granulation texture. All right.
Now, you said you could do it as long as it's still wet. If it dried, then you spray it and do it?
If it dries, you can spray it. I'm glad you asked that. You can spray it with water, the area that you want to work on some more, or you can spray it with a granulation medium. I got these little spritzer things, and I put granulation medium in here, and then if I really want to use a spray instead of the applicator bottle to wet with granulation medium the area that I've reapplied, I can do it with.
Where did you get that?
Was it perfume?
It looks like
A perfume thing? On Amazon, I think they're 6 for $7 or something like that, or they were.
Creative.
I keep Amazon in business.
Yeah,
My
we
wife
all
keeps
do.
Amazon in business. So, what else? Okay, I'll start on go back to the landscape now. And when this dries, I'll take some masking tape. It's a little bit fussier when you're going around a curved area, but I'll apply the masking tape along the curve, and then I'll just wipe with a Mr. Clean Magic Eraser the stray paint or ink that has traveled beyond where I want it to travel.
Will you use the masking tape to protect when
Yeah.
you do backgrounds?
Yeah, whatever I want to isolate and protect, I'll use masking tape for.
And the masking tape, if you put it over the painted part and work, does it lift the paint, or it doesn't lift it at all?
If it's good and dry, it won't.
Yeah.
So,
And it doesn't have to be painter's tape, it can be masking tape.
yeah. This is also Amazon, 10 in a package. I think it was $12, $15. I don't spend a lot on my supplies except in my paint and my paper. Not so much on my brushes and my other things. Okay. So for this, fairly dry now. I'll usually see if my reserved area is satisfactory before I go on to finish painting. And it worked, so good to go there. I'm not going to use the sepia because I don't want to play with trying to get this out now. But that's fine. It's all right. All right, so I'm going to put, the hardest part about this, one of the hardest parts about this, is putting your paint down in the thickness that you want quickly. That's why it's better to practice on small areas, because if you're working on large areas, by the time you get to the end of the page, you know, the first part is already dry. So you can pre-wet the paper, or not. If you don't pre-wet the paper, your paint colors will be more intense, the paint will be thicker, it won't be diluted by the water that's on the paper, it'll just be diluted by the water that you have on the palette of your brush. This is just water tinted by the whatever's in there. I'm going to think about having it a little bit lighter at the top of the hill, a little bit darker going down. So I'm going to put my raw sienna light, a little quin gold, some alizarin, some ultramarine, burnt sienna. Just a bunch of different colors. A little bit lighter toward the top, still wet. And if it's starting to dry, and it often does, especially if you're working larger, just spray it. You want to keep it wet and you're ready to add your ink. This is red earth and burnt sienna mixed. Whoops. You're going to squirt the granulation medium on right away. It's starting to dry, so I'm going to use the tip of this applicator just to move it around a little bit. I've got some specks in my sky. Some birds are flying at night in formation. What else? Just a little burnt sienna, burnt umber rather, in the lower corner. Add my granulation medium. Have it go that way.
When you're working on something bigger and doing it, are you working on one of the easels that can move about a lot, or?
I don't use, my painting table at home is about a 15-degree angle.
Yeah.
And that's where I start from. And then I'll pick up and move it around.
Okay.
It's easier to manipulate a board.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can see that the colors are melding together. Let's keep
Very cool.
moving it because it's still doing its thing.
Sorry.
So you saw all those very different colors that I applied initially, and now they're all sort of golden. But there are some areas that are still a little bit redder, a little bit browner, a little bit golden. And when this dries, if it's too light, as I said, I can always just go back in with a thin watercolor and pump those up.
There's Ross here and the purpose of the ink is to make the granulation medium more visible, or?
The granulation medium separates the pigments in the medium. You can use it on plain watercolor that has texture, that has granulated colors like ultramarine blue and some of the others. And it intensifies the disbursement. If you've ever used rough paper or very textured paper, you'll see how the pigment settles into the grooves of the tooth of the paper. This just amplifies that effect. And the ink is much more pigmented, so you're going to get more dramatic pigment effects when you're separating the pigment and the ink with the granulation medium. So you won't. Daniel Smith has granulating colors that are really nicely granulating on their own, but if you've ever tried them and you add granulation medium to that, it will really boost the way those granulate. And you can combine it with the inks too, if you really want to punch up your texture. Okay, so since I've taken more time than I intended to, I want to make sure that you have enough time to work on your own projects. Just let me show you the different things that you can do some more. I know that you've taken a look at the pictures. This is a recent one. I'm not quite finished with it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I applied the colors just as I did in that landscape, and then I added the dark areas to suggest breaks in the rocks.
How did you add the dark areas?
And when it was completely dry, I just painted them on with a brush.
Okay.
Paint, just watercolor paint, not ink. Here I just added washes of some ink and granulation medium to make a sandy effect or some texture on the beach. And this one was just the background. Everything else is just straight up watercolor, but this is the background. I honestly don't remember if I went over it very much with another color. I think it was pretty dark to begin with, but there's shades of green and reds in here and in the brown.
Paul, did
So
you
you-
do the background first and then the
Yeah,
still life?
I did. I masked the apples and the...
Now, if you didn't wet the apples area, do you have to mask? Could you avoid masking it?
You can avoid masking it, yes. You have to be very careful when you're putting the wash on that it doesn't run in, because you saw that I was wiping up the bottom of that ongoing while I was working it. But you can, if you keep an eye on it, and as I said, you can use Mr. Clean Magic Eraser afterward if you isolate the area. If you get a streak down there, you can just tape it to preserve your background and then lift it, repaint it. All right, so why don't you get started? What I would suggest that you do, if you haven't used this medium before, is to take some pieces of paper, just wet it with water or watercolor, drop some ink in, your granulation medium immediately afterward. Make sure that your base wash is wet, either with water or with paint, and just see how it behaves. And I'll just amble around and answer any questions. So just shout out if you have any.